I should be on. Oh, I'm better now.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Well, let's start over. It's always better the second time. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our afternoon session. I am Richard Rothfuss, Dean of the College of Liberal Arts and Social Sciences. This is our afternoon forum, Unpacking the Chaos at the Capitol. We are here today as part of our critical engagement series. The College of Liberal Arts and Social Sciences works hard every year to bring together events that take on wicked problems, questions, and challenges to the human condition. This year's theme is, what does it mean to be human? We're having a whole variety of presentations, including one later this evening on autism. You can check our Facebook page and see about that. I believe it's at 7 o'clock. But right now, we're together with 3 faculty members from the Department of Political Science to talk about one of the most fundamental parts of being human. To go back to Aristotle, all humans are political animals. We've had a bit of a political crisis in the nation this week. It's the first week of classes here at Central Michigan University. It's not exactly the best week for the dean to call up 3 professors and say, I know you're busy, but can you do an online forum for I don't know how many people will show up. But we have a distinguished crew here to navigate us through the issues and also answer some questions. So I am going to be moderating. I'll just be reading some questions. I'm going to disappear and hand this over to Dr. David Jesuit, the chair of the Political Science and Public Administration Department, to do a few more introductions and get us going. So David Jesuit, here you go.
Thank you, Dean Rothfuss. I'm very happy to be here today. I was a bit surprised to have the request to try to quickly organize a panel, but given the events of the last week to 10 days, I think it's important that we come together to try to understand where we are as a republic. I am the chairperson of the Department of Political Science and Public Administration. My area is really more in comparative politics, and so there are some questions that might come up, I think, that I hope I can answer from a comparative perspective, and looking at big questions like why people rebel, and what might have motivated the individuals who really acted as a mob at the Capitol on January 6th. So, but we could come to that later. I'd like to introduce the other panelists here. We're joined by the Honorable David Rutledge. He is our Griffin Endowed Chair in American Government. Mr. Rutledge was formerly a state representative, and I believe the minority whip in the Michigan House of Representatives. He is finishing his final term as the Griffin Endowed Chair. So thank you, Mr. Rutledge, for joining us today. We also have Dr. Kyla Stepp. Dr. Stepp teaches our classes in constitutional law, judicial politics. She has her PhD from Wayne State University, but she also has a JD. She's a lawyer. She has her JD from Georgetown University Law. So we will be turning to Dr. Stepp for some when we have some legal questions. So I hope you don't charge us by the hour, Dr. Stepp. I'm not sure we could afford the attorney fees. But thank all of you for joining us. We do welcome questions. We want to, as much as possible in this virtual world, try to replicate what we would do in person in having a dialogue and a discussion. And so let me first turn it over to David Rutledge and ask if he has some opening statement or question that could help us get going here.
Thank you, Dr. Jesuit. I just want to, first of all, let you know how special it is to be participating in this forum at this time, and how special it is that to see so many people, so many students join us. I just want you to understand very clearly that you are living through a critical time in our history. Future history books will write chapter after chapter about this period in our democracy, and you are living through it, seeing it unfold in real time. That is quite something. I also just want to, in terms of full disclosure, I want you to know that when I served, and I've served most of my adult life in the public arena. I've just so happened to have served as a Democrat, but I can also tell you a couple of other things. I am a Democrat because I have I lean more toward the philosophical base there, but I can also tell you that I'm not always a D in terms of how I vote and in terms of my philosophical base. And if you happen to ask any of my students what I am in politically, I dare say they wouldn't be able to tell you, because I argue both sides of an issue, and I argue it with them strongly, because the issue is not whether you're an R or D or an independent. The issue is, are you able to think critically about the issues that come before you? And I want to teach critical thinking. So I guess that's all of my opening statements. And I am just hopeful that there'll be lots of questions that we can respond to. The questions are important because it gets us focused on exactly what you're interested in.
Thank you, Mr. Rutledge. Dr. Stepp, did you want to make a comment, or did you want to start with the question, or would you like me to pose a question?
How about I just start by saying thanks for inviting me. I think this was a great idea. And I echo Professor Rutledge. I love to see so many people here. I think that engagement is always a good thing, even if it's about a topic that isn't super pleasant. So it's great to see so many people interested and involved. And I hope that we can answer your questions here today. So why don't we bring on some questions and see, as Professor Rutledge said, what people are interested in talking about.
I'll wait for a question to pop up, but in the meantime, maybe Dr. Stepp, I'm curious as to what happened yesterday, and I know that I even asked you some questions and concerning impeachment and the 25th Amendment. It's kind of hard to follow. Can you talk a little bit about what happened yesterday and what the next steps are with impeachment or the 25th Amendment that we're hearing about?
Sure. Well, I'll start with the 25th Amendment. It looks like as of this point, that's not something that's going to be invoked. Vice President Pence has said that he is not going to do that, and it would clearly require the Vice President to go along if the 25th Amendment was going to be successfully invoked. So as of this point, anyway, it appears to be a non-issue. We can talk more about that later if people want to know exactly what 25th Amendment would entail. But what did happen yesterday was an impeachment, and President Trump became the first president in history to be impeached twice. Now remember, impeachment doesn't mean that he has been convicted. It doesn't mean that he's removed from office. It simply means that the House approved the article of impeachment that was brought against him. In this case, there was one article, and it had to do with incitement of insurrection, right? That he incited the crowd that led to the chaos at the Capitol, to use the title of our panel here. So he was successfully impeached. 10 Republicans crossed the aisle, so to speak, and voted for impeachment. making it the most bipartisan impeachment in history as well. It's the most we've ever seen crossover from the other party to vote for impeachment. So impeachment is complete. Now it has to go to the Senate for a trial. And if any of you watched the trial last time, I know it seems like a really long time ago now. Pandemics will screw up your time like that. But it wasn't that long ago, right? Nearly a year ago, we had the trial last time, and he was not convicted last time. This time, we don't know exactly when that trial will take place. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, who for the time being is still Senate Majority Leader, at least for a little while still, has said that he will not bring forth the charges for trial until after President-elect Joe Biden is inaugurated next week. So there will be a trial in the Senate. We don't know when it will be. It will be sometime after the inauguration. At that point, whether President Trump is convicted or not of this article of impeachment remains to be seen. It would need a substantial number. I think it was 17 Republicans, and the Senate would have to cross over to vote to convict him, which seems unlikely, not as unlikely as in the last impeachment trial, but we'll see. So that remains to be seen. That will be something that happens after the inauguration. But as for now, President Trump is still in office until the inauguration, until Joe Biden takes over next week.
So we have a question related to a bit to what you just said, Professor Stepp. So this is not necessarily directed at you, but whoever wants it. Where do you think the GOP will go from here? We now see high-ranking Republicans going against party lines while others have stuck their loyalty with Trump. What do you expect to happen?
Well, go ahead, Professor Rutledge. You're the party expert. You go for it.
And of course, we got no crystal ball. We don't really we don't really know what will happen, but we know this. We know that the presumed leader of the Republican Party, which under normal circumstances would have been the outgoing president, the president, just by sheer fact that he's been president, would be the presumed kind of leader of the party. But right now, the GOP is in chaos and not quite sure what the future will hold for them, because now some of them, I've heard some GOP members themselves say that the Republican brand has been tarnished. And so now there comes this whole period where the strategists, the internal people in the party will huddle and try to focus on exactly how they rebuild, and rebuild they will have to do.
Thank you. Here's one of the earliest questions to come in, and the questions are piling up now. With the spinning and the storming of the White House from both sides, what source do you recommend to get unbiased update from news sources? So where do you august individuals go to for your news?
Well, if I just go to multiple sources. And so I explicitly, I make an effort, for example, to watch, if I'm watching the news, to watch CNN and Newsmax, for example. I think that it's helpful, to get a variety of perspectives. I do think the Washington Post is my preferred newspaper. I think it's a reputable paper. I know that many have felt that Washington Post leans a certain way, and that goes back to my days as an undergraduate, where it was called Pravda on the Potomac when we still had a Cold War in the Soviet Union. But I find the Post to be a strong newspaper, a good source of news. But when it comes to watching news, the NewsHour, PBS, is I think outstanding, and they make an effort to have a balanced perspective. I think they do. And then, like I said, trying to explicitly include different sources that might not, you already know, are going to give you spin in a way that disagrees with your own kind of perspective.
May I add to that? Because the key, I just want to key in on something extremely important, this idea of multiple sources. I know people who sit in front of one television channel, news channel, long hours of the day, just in front of that channel. Ultimately, that's, I think, in the long term, that's not healthy. So, point number one, make sure you're looking at multiple sources. What I do is I make sure that I'm looking and reading sources that may not necessarily have the same bent that I have, or same, kind of political persuasion that I have, because I want to understand what they're saying and where they're coming from. I'd like to echo that when I watch a television newscast, PBS news hours, what I watch, because it seems not canned, and they give more time to in-depth reporting. I hope we come back to this question because it brings up the idea of the press. And one of the things that got us to January 6th is is the president vilifying the press. I want you to note how many times that you would hear him say fake news. That was not by accident. And maybe later we can discuss why.
Figure I should jump in real quick here with my news sources, not to kind of echo what everybody else said, but yeah, PBS is great when I'm looking for a newscast. NPR is always one of my go-to for news, whether it's radio or podcasts, and that continues to be the case for Unbiased News. And then, as both of you said, absolutely go to multiple sources. Sometimes I find it most interesting to do that, to see how that spin is actually working, kind of on both sides. It's fascinating to me to see a story and then, oh, let's see how it's being spun here, how it's being spun there. So I think multiple sources, and then really those go-to unbiased sources, which for me, NPR, PBS are kind of the go-tos. That's how I make sure I'm getting news from multiple sources, including unbiased sources.
I see a lot of questions coming in. Maybe I could just raise one question, and probably for David Rutledge. It continues the conversation about what the future of the Republican Party is. I wonder, is it a coincidence that we saw 2 of the 10 Republicans who crossed the aisle to vote for impeachment come from the state of Michigan? I thought that was fascinating. Representatives Upton and Meyer both voted for the article of impeachment. Is that something about their districts? Is it? Are we talking about perhaps the Republican Party becoming a regional party, or much like the Democratic Party, where you have different regions of the country having different kind of political values? I think Professor Rutledge, you're muted.
This is what I'd like to think it's about. I'd like to think that this is about their own personal conscience and conviction. But having said that, there is also this idea that all representatives that crosses their mind. They represent a constituency. And so how they represent their constituency is another issue, and relates back to their personal philosophy of governing. Let me just give you an example, and this is a personal one. state representatives I'm talking about, represent 90,000 people. Congressmen, which these two Congress people that you just mentioned represent, each of them, about 260,000 people, a lot more people. And they will be getting phone calls, emails, all kinds of things from their constituency. And what they have to do is look at pros and cons in terms of what's coming at them. In the case of the way I would represent my district, started at the very beginning when I was campaigning. I would say unequivocally to in all the literature that went out, that these are big issues. And if this issue comes up, this is what you can expect of me. And the other thing that I'd put on all of my campaign signs is the word trust. That whatever I do, I'm going to be transparent, and you can trust that. Now, these two individuals, I believe, were following their conscience, but at the same time, they know that their district will be well off and better for the vote that they made.
We have a couple of related questions. One of them is, do you see the Trumpists leaving and forming their own party should enough GOP vote to convict? A question that presumes a Senate trial, but I think you can spin the question as you wish to answer it.
Who wants to take that one?
I take that one, Dr. Stepp. I've got one word for that. No. I don't think President Trump or the Trumps will start another party. But I do think that the Trump brand right now is toxic. But there is, make no mistake, there is a constituency out there that this is their guy, that he spoke for them, and there are lots of people that he is the only person that can speak for them. I'll add one other thing, and then I'll kick it to you, Dr. Stepp. And this is what I think. I think that if with just a wee bit of tweaking, and if President Trump had kept silent on certain issues, just not pushed the envelope, I think he would have won. And I think that not just because of the large number of votes that he was able to get, even with all of the the firebrand stuff that he carried on. But I think if you look at President-elect Biden, he had no coattails, none. As a result of him winning the presidency, he pulled no other place, no other constituency along with him. He changed no legislatures changed. Republican legislatures, including our own Republican-controlled legislatures, including our own here in this state, no change. And that followed through across the state, across the United States. So while he won, and won just a sizable victory, there's not a whole lot that beyond that that I think you can, he's going to have a lot of work to do to just try to pull pull people together, and it's going to be tough.
Yeah, and third parties tend to not be very successful historically, right? And members of the GOP understand that. I don't know that there will be. There's certainly dissent within the ranks in the Republican Party, but some, especially recently, some of the GOP leaders really seem to be focusing on how they can pull the party back together, right? I think some of this remains to be seen, once Trump leaves office next week, how visible he will be, what his next steps are. I think that will play a large role in kind of what happens with the party. I presume that the party believes that, at some point they'll be able to pull those kind of Trump-only voters back to the party if they put forward candidates who espouse some of the same values that Trump had, and to try to kind of tie it all back into the Republican Party as a whole. As far as kind of starting a new party, I suppose it's possible that some people could try that. I don't think it'll be very successful, and I don't think many Republicans will want to go that route. But it will be interesting to see kind of where Trump goes in his private life now. Is he going to remain in the public eye? A lot of you are asking here in the question, is he going to run for president again? Is he going to kind of leave that to some of his allies now? There's a lot of speculation that maybe one of his sons or other family members may kind of take up his mantle and run for office instead. So we'll kind of see if he fades from the public eye or sticks around with his, what he decides to do. And that, I think, will affect what kind of the hardcore Trump voters will do. But the Republican Party, as a whole, at this point, they're going to try to kind of heal wounds and bring themselves back. Because the only way they can really survive as a party and do well in the next few elections.
So, Professor Stepp, we have, I'm going to combine a couple of questions. You're our constitutional law expert, so I'll put these to you first. There's, of course, many questions about pardons, and can President Trump pardon himself? And also, I think there are questions out there, including one in our list of questions here, about can a Senate trial happen after President Trump has left the presidency?
Great questions. Well, to tackle that first, the second question first, there isn't precedent as to whether this can happen or not. Presumably, I know there have been some legal scholars out there who have said it probably can't happen after he leaves office. However, the majority of scholars have come down on the side of yes, it can. The impeachment is complete. So the trial is just the next stage of that. As long as the process has started before the person, in this case Trump, leaves office, then it can continue and has to continue. So obviously that might be something that will be left to the courts. We'll have to see, but there's not a solid answer on this. The Constitution doesn't say one way or the other. It can continue after the person leaves, right? So we will see on that. As far as whether the president can pardon himself, that's been a topic throughout the last few years. It was in 2018, I believe, where President Trump said, he has the absolute right to pardon himself. So he apparently believes that he does have that right. Some of his legal counsel have told him he does have that right. Many others have said a president cannot pardon themselves. This is something else we have no precedent for because no one's ever tried it. Richard Nixon actually debated doing this, right? He asked his legal advisors, he asked the Department of Justice, hey, can I pardon myself? And they came back and said, we don't know, probably not, and it's not advisable. And so he decided to just not even go that route at all. So other than that, it's never been really even talked about. This would also have to be something else that likely ended up in the courts if President Trump did decide to do that. Now, whether that's advisable for him to do strategically or not is a whole other question. But legally, whether he can pardon himself, most legal scholars tend to agree that he can't, that he won't be able to, even though the Constitution is silent on that. If you look back at the intent of the pardon section, and most Supreme Court justices these days do consider themselves to be originalists. So if they stick with that and they look at the intent, the intent was that you have a president and you have a person who's pardoned, that there are two people to this transaction, so to speak. And also the old saying that no man can be a judge for himself, paraphrasing, but that, also kind of stands, and that's where most people think the courts will come down on it. But we'll see. If he tries it, we will see. Certainly he can pardon anyone else, family members, whomever else, as long as it's federal crimes. Remember, pardons by the president only apply to federal crimes. Anybody, including him, could be charged with state crimes or local crimes, right? It's just federal crimes that he can pardon. So we'll see what he does between now and next Wednesday.
So I have one more legal question that I think can transition into a political question again. So there's been much talk about some legislators, our question asker, was Ted Cruz, Josh Hawley, Mo Brooks, as bearing some responsibilities for what has happened at the Capitol. If that's true, what should be done? So that's partially a legal question, partially a political question. And then the follow-up question is unity worth sacrificing accountability? Which is I'll call it a mega question and turn it to the panelists.
So as for the legal aspects of that, the answer is probably no. There's not a lot of legal liability that, at least that I can see, coming from the actions of Senator Cruz or Senator Hawley. The reason why President Trump is potentially facing charges is because he was there speaking to the people prior to the riots, the Capitol, right? So there's at least kind of a connection there. If they try to charge him with incitement, they could say he was there an hour before inciting the crowd. These other senators, although they could potentially make an argument that, on social media, their statements added to it. As far as legal liability, I think it's a tenuous connection at best. Moral reliability or moral accountability, of course, is a whole other matter. That's a completely different thing, and I think I will turn that over to my more politically in tuned colleagues who can speak to that.
I think Professor Rutledge is muted.
Would Professor Stepp, would you agree though that the individuals named, if there could be shown unequivocally some connection between the rioters getting into the Capitol and being encouraged in some way beckoned on or aided and abetted in any way, that at a minimum they could be censured by the Congress, could they not?
Oh, definitely, yes. If that, I haven't seen any evidence to that nature yet, but if that comes out, that there is a connection, that there was some sort of direct incitement or help, then yes, absolutely, that could be something where they're censured, or it could go beyond that and it could lead to federal charges, even for senators, certainly.
Yeah, I'd like to go back to this unity question and ask if that could be asked again. I want to make sure I hear it correctly. It's a very important question. Could you just repeat that piece?
Yes, let me scroll through the questions and get it exactly right. Is unity worth sacrificing accountability?
The answer to that is no. Unity is never worth sacrificing accountability. Accountability, to allow accountability to go by the wayside would set up kind of two classes of people. People who are above the law, and that can't, you just can't allow that. And all the time, in all instances, the democracy, in my view, would start to unravel if you start to not hold people accountable for breaking the law.
So let's shift a little bit to the events of the Capitol, at the Capitol. The rioters. We've got a lot of questions about those. One of them is, how is it possible that a lot of ordinary citizens saw the siege coming because it was all over social media, but the Capitol was not defended? Was it an inside job, and will we get to the bottom of that?
I would suggest that we will get to the bottom of it. Have no way of knowing yet, and I don't think the investigation is complete. Ongoing investigation, but here again, accountability. Those people will be made accountable if there were in fact an inside job. So I can't say unequivocally as a fact that that's been established yet.
Yeah, this is kind of one of the more sinister things that we're hearing now, where I guess it depends what you mean by an inside job. More specifically, we're talking about members of the Capitol Hill Police Department who were complicit in assisting rioters either the day before, aided and abetted, by the way, by congresspersons who, for example, led a tour the day before for certain individuals who were rioting. This is an allegation coming from a member of Congress. I can't remember her name right now, as well as Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, that there were some congresspersons who were complicit in providing aid and assistance to the rioters, as well as members of the Capitol Police. So when we talk about an inside job, I think that there is at least sufficient evidence to have really grave concerns about the institutions there, about the whether or not there were, this grand conspiracy for individuals who are charged with defending the Constitution in the case of members of Congress, and the Capitol Hill Police charged with maintaining the safety of the Capitol and everyone inside. So I think we will get to the bottom of that. I hope we will, but that's something that I think we should all be very concerned about. And I would just also add that we do have some evidence indicating that police departments have been infiltrated by white supremacists. That's just a reality. And some of these allegations are related to a white supremacy movement, and whether or not there are some individuals who were complicit or aiding and abetting the kinds of crimes that were committed because of that ideology of white supremacy.
One of our questioners has pointed out that there have been many comparisons between the event at the Capitol and BLM protests of the past summer, and they are wondering about the panelists' thoughts about those comparisons.
The comparisons were, it's hard to escape. On the one hand, you see an absolute overpowering show of force for protest that was actually a protest that was, by all accounts, peaceful in its nature. At least it started out that way. On the other hand, January 6th, you saw a large group of people, and here again, not you didn't see the kind of show of force even after they were inside the Capitol perimeter. And it was clear that they were trying to just go into the Capitol. It's a comparison that's hard to escape. Now, the bigger question is how does this happen? Was was January 6th planned to the point? Was it planned that there wouldn't be as much show of force? These are speculations that we don't know, but I don't think it escaped anyone the contrast of those two events. Except on January 6th, there was no Bible.
We have a couple of questions about the actual rioters, the citizens who were rioters, and if there's any anticipation or thought that there will be charges of murder, sedition, treason, charges along those lines. Are those yet to come? Is that level of accountability for the individuals in the Capitol, not the politicians, but the rioters themselves, on the way still?
According to the Department of Justice, those charges are still to come. Like any investigation, it doesn't happen overnight. So, they're taking a while to compile evidence, to get all these social media accounts, to get all the video accounts of that day, to talk to people. So yes, some people have already been charged, and they've been charged mostly with these kind of smaller offenses, right? Like being in a federal building that you're not supposed to, kind of akin to trespassing. Some have been charged with more serious offenses, but we haven't seen, treason, sedition, those types of charges yet. However, those charges are very serious and they take more investigation, they take more evidence. And the Department of Justice, as it should, right, is taking its time to make sure it gets that evidence, to make sure it has a solid case before it charges people. But they have reassured, they've had multiple press conferences lately, and each time they said, these charges are coming. They expect hundreds of people eventually to be charged, maybe not all with treason and sedition, but at least some of them will be. Now, on the other hand, some of the people who got arrested, very quickly thereafter for curfew violations and things like that, some of those cases, if they weren't directly involved in the riots, some of those cases may go away. Some of the people who were out kind of wandering the streets that night and got arrested for a curfew violation, some of those we may not see. But the people directly involved, I expect it may take weeks before we see these charges, but I do expect that they will be charging multiple people with these much more serious offenses once they have the investigation complete, or at least mostly complete, and once they have a lot more evidence. So I think we should see a lot more charges coming forward. What they've done so far is just kind of to get things started, to get things rolling through the courts. We'll see a lot more charges.
Okay, I have one more. We're going to move back to questions about social media here in a minute, but I have one more question along these lines. The FBI has issued a bulletin stating that similar attacks are expected at every state capitol in every state. What authority does state government have to mobilize the National Guard to defend against these attacks? And do only governors have that authority?
To my knowledge, there have been, the National Guard has been alerted to some of the states that there may be events and that they should be on guard. I don't know. I think it depends on the state and how far that's going. But, there is expected to be some more violence, whether that's, in every state, oh, excuse me, in every state or just some of the states. It remains to be seen, but I do believe that in many of these states, the National Guard has already been mobilized.
Yeah.
And is that a state authority that does that? Do you know?
Yeah, the governor can do that.
Okay.
Yep.
I've been informed as well that they've put up the fencing around the Capitol. I haven't been down there, the Capitol in Lansing, and they're anticipating, some violence. They're preparing for it. And I've also heard on the news, I'm sure many of you have as well, that they've banned open carry because there was kind of a preview of what happened at the U.S. Capitol here in the state of Michigan when we had individuals enter the Capitol and attempt to disrupt proceedings, in fact, who were armed. And at that time, of course, that was, that's legal, open carry. There was no prohibition against open carry in the state Capitol building. But I think just in the last week, they changed that policy so that you could no longer carry open, firearms in the state Capitol in Lansing.
Kind of just as an aside, if there are those who are wondering, why no National Guard in DC? DC is not a state. The mayor didn't have the authority to bring in National Guard, and there was a long period of time. I think something like 90 minutes, even when there were calls. And some surrounding areas were starting to mobilize. This was kind of after the Capitol had been breached.
So will this be the final straw that finally pushes DC into statehood? Are we going to get there now?
Oh, boy, if this doesn't get DC there, I don't know what will. It's been over a long period. The effort, the campaign to do it. DC has, I think they have 3 electoral votes, but still not been granted statehood.
I'm interjecting myself, but I suspect what some of the investigations say about how much complicity there was in what happened will play into that statehood equation. But I'm not on the panel, so let's move to social media. We have some great questions about the role of social media and its use by politicians. I'm gonna, with my apologies to the questioners, I'm gonna have to combine a few of them. We've seen a lot of use by social media by politicians. So I'm going to turn the questions in 2 ways. How could social media sites do a better job filtering out baseless information regarding politics? That's part 1 of the questions. And part 2 is, are you anticipating any actual regulations on this after what's happened?
Wow, this is a difficult question.
I'd like to, there is a part 1. The only comment I want to make in this regard is that there is a thin line that you're walking here without falling into the free speech piece, and that's the dilemma. The thing that we have to be careful of. All we do know that all speech is not free speech. I mean, there's some speech that is prohibited. You can't walk into a theater and yell fire, kind of thing, when there's no fire. But I don't know how we're going to fall on this, but I anticipate that there will be some regulation to flow, and that regulation will flow from the federal level.
Can I put you on the spot, Professor Rutledge, and ask you what you think about the suspension or permanent ban of by Twitter on Donald Trump?
I think that falls across the line into the kind of speech that we would refer to as insightful speech, inciting Professor Stepp used the word sedition, things that would be that would undermine our Constitution. So I think that's absolutely appropriate, and I think those platforms are going to be found to be on good solid ground.
So one of our questioners pointed out, asked the questions: why are private companies being asked to be impartial when governments are not?
I just didn't hear that question.
Yeah.
So, why are the private, in the realm of social media and news broadcasting, why are private companies being asked to be impartial when governments are not?
I would want to maybe turn that around a little bit, and maybe the question has to do with limitations on free speech that we were just talking about, or the ability of a private corporation to limit, set standards, for example, and therefore limit speech that wouldn't apply perhaps in political speech. I wonder if that's what the question is getting at. Could Twitter just ban and Facebook just ban individuals like they have? And would there be an obligation or a prohibition of banning those individuals when it came to perhaps a speech at a civic event?
Now, I think the answer to that would be based on procedures, rules that are set up by those companies, and I also think that those rules have to relate back to. I mean, they can't be focused on a specific person or a specific kind of. You can't single people out, so it has to be in a much broader way and fold back to some kind of underlying standards that these companies have.
To dig a little bit deeper on the social media issue and some of the events and what's happening, several of our questioners have raised the issue of the percentage of the population which is focused on conspiracy theories, that gets their news from exclusively one source. We have a large percentage of one political party that believes the election results were fraudulent. We have Republican senators and representatives voting to decertify election results. How do we move forward as a country when so many people are refusing to even listen to news outside of their circle?
We don't.
Yeah,
we don't move forward as a country if we continue in this direction. We had this conversation. I think we're compelled to be truth tellers, is what we do here. I'm not optimistic. I wish I could say that things are going to get better. I feel like I should provide some hope, and there are some things that we can maybe, some things that we can do to improve conditions, but I don't think it's just an individual like Donald Trump that was the source of this kind of polarization that we see in the United States. It's too easy to just point to one individual and say that things are going to get better. They're not. I don't see that in the medium term, I should say, in the next decade or so. I see continued polarization in this country. I see that. I think that it's very likely that those individuals will lose the primaries. Here's a prediction that we talked about earlier about the Republican Party. I've already seen, I mean, there will be primary challenges for the Republican legislators who voted for impeachment, without a doubt. And if they lose, winning, politics is about winning here. So if they're defeated, that sends a strong message, and then we'll see, if not Trump in 2024, somebody who's advocating Trump's positions, and we'll see continued polarization. So, I mean, I think that there are some structural elements here. I would point to the kind of economic disparities that have been growing now for decades in this country, the racial disparities that, we addressed. It hit us over the head just seeing what happened and watching this on C-SPAN. I mean, we've heard the notion of white privilege. I mean, wow. To me, that was just striking to see that there was no white privilege meant that the rioters were just able to descend on the Capitol without anyone really trying to stop them. And so, unless we address those disparities, I'm not optimistic at all, and I don't think we move forward.
I'd like to add a footnote to your comments, and this struck me, and I thought long and hard about it, and it's this comment, and it came from Nolan Finley, who is a member of the Detroit News editorial board. And he put these comments in a column that he wrote on November 8th, 2020. And this is what he said, and I'd like to quote here. "It will take more than dumping President Trump to fix what's wrong with this nation. What Trump did in his surprise victory 4 years ago was expose just how sharply divided Americans are as a people." In essence, that's what you said, and it's this gap, it's this huge chasm that that President Trump has exploited, and I suggest and submit exacerbated. And he was banking on winning by further exploiting this gap. So it's the other reason that I would not envy the incoming president, Biden. In terms of the job that he will have to try to bring these two groups closer to the middle. The only way that he is going to be able to do that is to piss a lot of people off on his own side, and try to find a way of giving voice and recognition to some of these people who have who were so much on the Trump side. It's going to be really tough. I submit this though, unless we find a way of somehow bringing us closer to the middle, we're in for a long haul of some very things that could be disastrous for our democracy.
So let's those were great words, David, and I'm glad we recorded this. So we will perhaps excerpt them and play them again for those who will listen. They're not nonpartisan words to live by, so thank you. Let's jump back to presidential politics for a second. I know a lot of us are wondering on this, so let's hear our panelists' best guesses. There's a few days left. Is Trump going to resign and get Pence to pardon him?
No.
I agree. I don't see that happening. It's possible. You never know. But it seems unlikely at this point.
I agree.
All right, so we have a triple no prediction. We'll check back in a little bit to see how well that prediction holds up. No one should be held accountable for trying to predict individual actions in this particular situation. One of our, oh yes, go ahead, David.
Yeah, I just want to I want to put another thought on the record here, because I don't want to suggest that there is no hope, and that it's going to be so tough that we can't find rallying points. And I want to tell you why. I think there are a lot of people in leadership positions now who are people of courage and of good conscience, who want to do the right thing. I want to share with you something that I thought was huge, and it gives me hope. It comes from the Orlando Sentinel newspaper. The Orlando Sentinel, back in October of 2020, gave a glowing endorsement to a congressman, an incumbent congressman by the name of Michael Waltz. But on December the 12th, they rescinded that endorsement, and they rescinded it with a scathing op-ed. And this is the point. This gives me hope. This is what that op-ed said. It said, during our endorsement interview with the incumbent congressman, we didn't think to ask, would you support an effort to throw out the votes of tens of millions of Americans in 4 states in order to overturn a presidential election and hand it to the person who lost, Donald Trump? They went on to say, every American should be appalled at the attempted usurpation, and every elected official taking part in this terrifying fiasco and violating their oath to protect the country from enemies foreign and domestic. Every person should feel remorse. Every person who supported Michael Waltz for Congress should feel a deep sense of remorse and regret. And then they said, we do. When you have institutions and people in leadership, particularly those people who hold public trust, who hold public office, stepping up, displaying courage, even in the midst of maybe potentially losing their job. It seems to me that that's how we're going to kind of come back together. I don't care how bad things get. If you're in public office, you are obligated to tell people the truth. It's part of the oath you take. I had to raise my hand and affirm And not only did I raise my hand, I had to sign a piece of paper. So there is hope, but it takes courageous people standing up. That's why it's important that we're talking to our students. It's courage. I'm sorry to go off. I apologize.
I love the eternal American optimism, and it's really quite evident. And I know that we're joined in the audience by students from Europe, and I do, and you know, I don't. I said in the medium term, and I think we have an obligation to be realistic, and I don't expect in the next decade that things will get better. And we know that the framers of the Constitution, you know, didn't have such a high regard for human nature. We're seeing that in the opportunistic kind of actions of politicians in DC now. That's not going to change. But if we can get through this period, and I think we will, you know, that there is hope in the longer term, that the country will become more united again. But because I think that there are these, as I said, structural factors, the economy, for example, and you know, the grievances that people have are not just made up. You know, I wish it were just some fantasy that, you know, that these individuals in Washington, D.C. all had great lives, and somehow they've just been hoodwinked into thinking that political, you know, elites have stolen one election. But there are real underlying grievances that these people have, and you know, the idea of relative deprivation that's fundamental to understanding why people rebel. In real terms, things haven't gotten better for people. In real terms, in some cases things have gotten worse, and so that's what I worry about when I say that. You know, we need to gird ourselves for a difficult period until such a time as frankly we enact public policy that addresses some of the underlying economic, social, racial disparities. And I don't see that we're moving in that direction politically. I think, you know, it's a mistake, and I see some questions here to see the 2020 presidential election as a vindication for a social democratic agenda. I don't see it that way. And so I don't think we'll see public policies coming that will perhaps address some of these underlying disparities. And, you know, maybe I'm wrong.
So given the rather unique way President Trump occupied the presidency, are there new precedents that have been set about what a president can and can't do? What does the presidency look like in the future, and how might that play into your differing perspectives of the next 10 years for the country?
I think I'd like to come at that question this way. This presidency and this period should not be held up as any kind of standard or any example going forward. In the annals of history, this will be recorded as a blimp, an unusual circumstance. So I think going forward, we'll look back and learn from this. This was not a good example, and the thing I worry about those issues that Chair Jesuit has so eloquently pointed out. But I also worry about the view from the outside, how the world is looking at us and what that will mean for our standing in it. There's a lot of repair that has to that has to come, and I am hopeful that somehow people who hold public office, and specifically Congress, can rally around some of the things that that will help us look better. I hasten to point out that the kind of consternation that this president has created, aided and abetted by leaders in his own party, used to not happen. There's something called tolerance and forbearance are things that used to govern, or that Congress or people who are in those hallowed halls would somehow adhere to. I mean, we're here. We may have our different philosophies, a philosophical base in terms of how we adhere to our constitutional edicts. But there was always an understanding of how tough the debate got, that we're all in this pie together, and that we all want the Constitution to be robust and stand. But what we have seen is that there is an element within our society that's willing to tear it all down, tear it up. I call it what it is, Professor Stepp, an insurrection. I go further. I call it an attempted coup. So, there's a lot of work, but it did not used to be this way. We've somehow gotten off track, and I remain hopeful that we have to get back. We have to get back to being more civil. We have to get back to understanding that sometimes you win elections and sometimes you lose. But it's not a war. It's not beating up on the other side and winning at all cost.
I think that one of the things that establishes a precedent will be the impeachments, and frankly, I think that's very important. And I don't think it's going to have an effect on Trump's presidency. President Trump won't be removed from office. He'll finish his term on the 20th. Joe Biden will assume the office. But it does establish that there are lines that can't be crossed in the future. Mitch McConnell, for example, when he finally indicated that President Trump lost, it was the day when the states had certified the results in the various state capitals of the electoral colleges. And, that was a thing. They were gathered on January 6th under this Electoral Count Act of 1887. I think, that resulted from a period of reconstruction after the Civil War, in which there were contested sets of electors that were sent forward to Washington, D.C. This was a decade before in 1876 presidential election, and so that was the most divisive period in American history. I think we would agree to that, the Civil War and its immediate aftermath. And so, once the states, though, certified those electors, that was it. That was it. There was no other constitutional remedy. And the problem was President Trump and the other Republicans who continued to say that it was stolen and contested. And, that's where I think at Mitch McConnell's, at that point, when there were certified electoral college votes, it's over. It's over. And there were no contested slates of electors. And so we have to see, I think the impeachment and the article of impeachment refers to this period. It's not just about the incitement on January 6th. It's about the rejection of basic norms that have been, the standard in American democracy since the founding period, that you accept the results of the election. And there's a peaceful transfer of power. And President Trump and those Republicans clearly violated those norms. Going back to the contested election, the first real transfer of power to another political party in 1800. Okay, I mean, that was the norm. And so in that sense, I think the affirmation by impeachment or and there's likely to be a trial, maybe there won't be, but if there's not a trial, there will be some perhaps 14th Amendment, the Section 3 that we haven't talked about, that others are discussing, that would prohibit President Trump from running from office again. But I think that's the way in which Trump's presidency shapes future administrations, is reinforcing these basic lines. And that if you cross that line, there will be consequences. And so I do think that this is the right course of action for that reason. By the way, I'm glad that Bill Clinton was impeached too.
So here's a fresh question just came in. It's not in the Q&A, the panelists can see it. Came in on a different, texted to me. Do you think there will be an appetite to codify into law limitations to presidential power that previously relied on norms, such as whether or not a president can swap out members of his Justice Department when he's under investigation, whether or not a self-pardon can be done, etc.?
I can take that one because it's an easy one. Yes, I do think that we will see, particularly with this new administration and the very small but still there Democratic kind of majority in Congress, I think we'll see some movement to try to stop a lot of the things that we've seen the Trump administration do over the last 4 years, things that in their own way were unprecedented. And I think that, I don't know if it will be, some of these moves probably will be successful, some won't. But I do anticipate there being some movement, some legislation proposed, and perhaps some passed, that do try to limit presidents in the future from doing some of these things that, as you said, were upheld via, these traditional norms or in these informal ways, but making them formal in writing may be the way to go if people are concerned about future presidents following the precedent of President Trump and doing some of these same things. So I expect we'll see some of that relatively early on in the Biden administration. as well. So we'll see how successful it is. But yeah, I expect to see that.
All right, excellent. So we're coming up towards the end of our time. We're not there yet, but I want to round up some of the questions I've been neglecting. We apologies to our many attendees. We couldn't get to every question on the list. Many of you are enrolled in classes here at CMU, so corner these professors in our virtual hallways or catch them after vaccination in the real hallways. This is an interesting one. Can you speak to the reports that some of the rioters in both instances, meaning the BLM events of the summer or this current Capitol riot, were paid? If true, could it be the same person, organization trying to divide the country and destroy it from within? And then I'll add in my own bit to that. If not true, what drives these rumors or these thoughts?
I have no idea about the truth or not of that. But I can say that I would not rule it out of the question. There are, I mean, I know when petitions are circulated for various causes, people are paid to do that. I wouldn't put it past that some people are paid to show up at these type of events. Having said that, as you know, President Trump thrived on these large rallies. I also wouldn't put it past the fact that there were people paid to be present there as well and wear the red cap. But none of these things do I know and would I put out as fact. Rumors get started and they circulate for a purpose of benefiting someone. And the question becomes, I think, who are the people that take these things and run with them? And you may be surprised or not that there are some very distinguished and learned people who buy into to these rumors. There are people, in spite of the fact that all across this country there are people, both Republican and Democrats, who are responsible for running elections, and in spite of the fact that courts have said there was no widespread fraud, there are people that you cannot tell. That will never believe that this election was not stolen. I have a friend who is an engineer I just talked to earlier today who said, Dave, now you know this election was stolen. I mean, and if you could see the thread of some of the stuff that he sends me, you unbelievable. But I don't know the answer to that. But I do know this. Somehow we have to find ways of not isolating ourselves from people who think differently than we think, or people who are prone to latch on to things like rumors that we just can't fathom them doing. Somehow we got to find a way to still remain friends, still have communication. That's what I believe.
Okay, no one else is jumping in on that, so I'm going to pull one final question for the panelists from our many questions we got. Before I do that, I'm going to make a final plug for critical engagements. 7 p.m. tonight, Elizabeth Fine will be speaking on coming of age on the autism spectrum, a clinical ethnography of identity, medicine, and magic among the neurodivergent youth. Just go to the College Liberal Arts and Social Sciences Facebook page. You'll find the information there. Our roundup question, and we're going to let Professor Stepp go first because she has a 5 o'clock event, if I remember correctly. What do you see as some of the most significant outcomes of the events in the short and long term? Let's make it 1 or 2 since we've only got 4 minutes left. Most significant outcome of these events in the short and long term. Professor Stepp, you get to go first.
Thank you. Yes, I do have a class at 5. I know some of my students are here, so they can follow me over to class shortly after I give my answer here. But it's hard to say. I'm not a big fan of making kind of these bold predictions, especially in today's a little bit unpredictable environment. Short term, I think it will be most interesting to see what happens with the transition over, to new President Biden. It's very short term. In the next week or so, we are expecting some of these big rallies and protests, some of which could potentially turn violent. If you have some of the same friends on social media like I have, a lot of people still insist that a civil war is coming and is happening in the next week. So I obviously hope that there's no truth to that, but I do fear that we'll see some more violence in the short term here. My hope is that after the inauguration, when we do see the transition of power, maybe we'll see kind of a calming down of things. It's hard to say. Also short term, kind of medium term, it's hard to say whether President Biden will be able to get much of his agenda done, right? Despite having that very, very tiny majority in Congress. Not, at this point, not everybody is on the same page. Not even all Democrats are on the same page. So it'll be interesting to see, what happens kind of politically after this transition of power. Long term, I share the same fears as my colleagues here. I wish I had a great answer to how to kind of fix the divide that we see in our country. In many of my classes, we discuss this, and I always say, if you have a great answer, please tell me, please share it with somebody. Nobody seems to have a great answer to this. I would love to have a solution. And I don't want to be pessimistic, but I don't see it changing anytime soon. I hope that we can see some new policies, things that address these underlying issues. As both of them said, this isn't a President Trump thing. This has been growing for a while. We point to income inequality and wealth inequality and many other structural issues in our country, systemic issues that got us to where we are. So I hope to see some change that will help move us in the right direction. But otherwise, long term, sadly, I just see kind of more of the same, at least for a while. But I hope I'm wrong about that.
Okay, thank you very much, and have a great class. Professor Jesuit or the Honorable Mr. Rutledge, you guys choose.
No. Let's let the Honorable David Rutledge have the last word, and I want to be brief for that reason. I've already said that I think I am pessimistic, but maybe I can be a bit, I don't know, pithy. This idea of think globally, act locally. At the individual level and within our community and our groups of friends, we can't treat each other well, and I try to do that. I feel very fortunate to be here in our intellectual community, and the values that we have here at CME are values that I aspire to and will work to uphold. So at that local level, I think that in our community, I can be optimistic at that level and say that things at the national level might be going in a bad direction, but locally we could take care of each other.
I am, first of all, thankful to be in the midst of CMU that is an amazing, nurturing, academic learning community that pays attention to our students. In the short term, what I see is that we have been reminded of how young our democracy is and how yet still frail it is. We will celebrate on Monday Dr. Martin Luther King's birthday. We'll celebrate it on Monday. I recall him saying that this democracy is but a bud. It has not yet flowered, become a flower. And there is no part of this country, this democracy, that has clean hands when it comes to the racial issue, white privilege issue, and just the brotherhood of mankind issue. In the long term, while we are yet an infant and we saw what can happen, I am encouraged because the guardrails held. Congress was able to do what it was charged by our Constitution to do. Albeit a ceremonial thing, they counted the votes and declared a winner in this election. Over the long term, we have to find ways of becoming closer together in a civil way, and we have to we have to decrease this idea of winning at all cost. Sometimes you win, sometimes you lose, but what you can't do is put winning above the Constitution and all of the things that our democracy stands for. Winning does not mean you run roughshod over those ideals. I'm thankful to have this opportunity and really thankful for those who participated with us.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us, and that's why I'm glad you had the last word, Professor Rutledge. If you do have questions, you can find us through our, I think our Facebook page for the college or the department, or email any of us. We're happy to hear from students.
Excellent.
Thank you,
everyone.